So I've moved a lot throughout my adult life, and I'll be moving cross country once again in a few months. And while I was born and raised in New York City, Boston was the first non hometown city that I lived in. Back then, I was very much in my early formative years of growing my photography craft, and I've got the mistakes to prove them. In this fifth entry of my Then and Now series, we're going back just over 16 years to the first day that kicked off the second decade of this millennium, January 1st, 2010. Back then, I was shooting with the Canon 5D Mark II, and I was obsessed with my Canon 17mm tilt shift lens. I used it and over-abused it many times, as you're about to see. Fortunately, Lightroom's editing tools have come quite a long way, making it a lot easier to resurrect these photos. So with that, let's dive in. All right, so this is the photo that I took and edited back in 2010. You can see down here, it was taken on January 1st, 2010, and this is taken along the side of the South Street Diner in downtown Boston. And I don't know, I love the photo, I love the composition. It was, obviously in the evening, and I was really into those gritty scenes, and this area of Boston had that. And so I was just having fun. I was just walking around. There was hardly anyone out, which is interesting because it was January 1st, but it was quite dead in this area. So really quickly, you can see, before we dive into the image itself, this is the Canon 5D Mark II. I don't know why, as part of my edits that turned this into a TIFF, it lost the lens information, but you'll see it in the other photos. You could see it's 17mm, so it is the Canon 17mm tilt shift lens, but I guess this piece of metadata was lost. Now, looking at the photo, this is very common of the type of editing that I did back in this time of my life. And as you can see, it's just like overly crunchy. Like, I don't even know what's going on here. This is terrible. It looks like an 8-bit video game, to be honest. But I loved this camera back then. Now, the other thing, speaking of the tilt shift, I mentioned this in the intro that I over-abused it. What I mean by that is a tilt shift lens does two things. It tilts and it shifts. And so shifting is fantastic, especially for architecture photography, because it helps you get rectilinear lines. It gets you those nice straight lines. Very, very helpful for like real estate and commercial architecture photographers. Tilting is also helpful in that it can help you, when used correctly, really extend the depth of field of your photo. Or if you go the other way, which is what I always did, you can see here, it creates these funky shallow planes of focus. So you can see that the plane of focus, instead of it kind of falling off horizontally, I ended up swiveling the lens and made the plane of focus fall off vertically. So you can see it kind of goes from sharp, 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 and then it kind of falls out of focus from left to right instead of from, say, bottom to top or top to bottom. Now, like everything in moderation, it could be cool. And I feel like it does a pretty good job here, a pretty cool effect. It's a bit overdone, to be honest, a bit too strong of a tilt of the lens. And you can see my aperture was at the lens's widest f4. But let's drop over to the grid and we'll look at the original photos. Now, you could argue, like, all right, you can see here I have my bracketed photos. There are 2, 4, 6, 7, which means that there's a 0 exposure, and then there are 3, -1, -2, -3, and then 3, +1, +2, +3. So one-stop increments. And if we kind of step through these really quickly, you can see over here, first of all, you see now it shows the correct lens, which is the Canon TS E17. I love this lens. And let's go ahead. So this is probably the -3, -2, -1, 0, +1, +2, +3. So at +3, you can see the brackets. I'm getting all of that really good information in the shadows, but the highlights are totally blown out. And then if I go down to -3, shadows are crushed, but I'm getting really good highlight information. So what I must have done originally, actually, I know I did that is because I could look at the file name, is that I sent this for tone mapping. I probably was using Photomatics back then, more likely than not. And then I edited this, I don't know in what app. Could have been Photoshop. It could have been the old On1 Photo Tools, something like that. Probably On1 Photo Tools, if I remember correctly. And that, in case you aren't aware, Photo Tools was a Photoshop plugin. I loved it. It had some really, really cool kind of effects or Photoshop automations or actions. And I use it all the time, but it doesn't exist anymore. So looking at this here, I'm going to stick with the zero exposure image. I've mentioned this in other videos where back in the day, I auto exposure bracketed everything. And this would be a scenario where you could argue that auto exposure brackets is valid. It's warranted because there is quite a shift in dynamic range. You know, you've got very dark areas and you've got very bright areas. And so you could argue that tone mapping would be warranted here. But I'm not going to do that. I don't think we need to. As I got older and more confident in my photo editing skills and in understanding how far I can push individual raw files, I realized I could probably just get away with a lot just using a single raw file. That's not to say that I couldn't tone map, but I could, you know, but in this situation, as I get older, I find like I want to be as efficient as possible and use the most effective tools for the job. So with that, we're going to go ahead and let's start editing this. So we'll go to the edit panel over here. And normally the first thing I usually do is either apply the adaptive color profile or I'll click auto here just to see what I can get with the light and color sliders. But as you can see here, we are clearly off with our white balance. And that's probably because I was using auto white balance with my camera. I did not have like a color checker passport or some sort of a gray card that I would have photographed here to get a true white balance, but that's okay. You know, we'll just go ahead. We'll go to color here. I'm going to select the white balance dropper. I don't know how many people watching this. Well, probably most of my audience remembers payphones. But if you are younger and say the first phone you've ever had was a mobile phone like an iPhone or an Android, you might be looking at this device here and wondering, what is this? Well, that is what we used to make phone calls well before cell phones existed. Now, I had a cell phone at this time in 2010, but as a kid, if I had to call my parents, that's pretty much the only way that I can do so. So you would put a quarter in that little slot over there and you would call your parents. But I know that this payphone booth, this is usually silver, like a metal. So I'm going to try to white balance off of this. And it does a better job. You can see how it cuts through that color cast. Now, you can refine this. Like I can go ahead here to temperature and maybe just warm it up a tiny bit because it got a bit too warm. So right there, that looks pretty neutral. You can also see the benefits of the tilt shift lens in terms of shifting because while these lines are straight, you can see they're not actually having any sort of distortion. I feel like they can still be more straight. And so I'm going to jump over to crop over here and then under geometry, if this is collapsed, just make sure it's expanded. I'm going to click on this auto upright button, which is this little magic wand icon. And you can see how it did watch. See how it kind of made the lines really straight? So that's good. And because I used the shift function of my tilt shift lens, you can see how there's not much correction needed. If I used, say, a regular 17 millimeter lens at 17 millimeters, you would probably have more distortion to correct. The other thing that I want to do is I want to crop in like this edge here of the wall. That's one of the things I always do is I'll look along the edge of the frame. You can see here this corner, I don't like it. And so I'm going to crop in from the top left here, right around there, and then there. That's looking good. Now, come to think of it, I'm going to go back to crop here and I'm going to rotate this just a little bit clockwise. It just looks like it needs a touch of rotation. All right, good. We're good here. All right, now we could start working on color and tone. So if I click on the profile dropdown over here, I can just hover over adaptive color. And you can see actually this does quite a good job. Like I actually like what it does here big time in terms of wrangling in tone and color. Of course, I can let go here and then go to auto and click this. And in this situation here, I don't like what it did. Partly because you can see here, it's manipulating tone and color. And so it's kind of increasing vibrance and saturation. I'm not a fan of this. So I'm going to undo that by clicking auto, and then I'm going to apply adaptive color. And then I'm going to take the amount slider and drag it to the left to kind of back off a little bit right around here. Okay, that's looking good. Now I'm going to start working on distractions. And so really the distractions that I want to get rid of are these kind of glue circles. I assume they had something mounted here, maybe another payphone. Maybe they moved the payphone over. Also this yellow sticker here. Like I only want the yellow of the payphone receiver handle to be kind of what draws your eye. This is kind of like my focal point. And as you can see, this is the original color of the handle. I didn't do any manipulation to it. All right, let's go ahead and click on remove here. And then I'm going to ensure that this use generative AI checkbox is enabled so that we use the gen remove brush. Let's go ahead and make a larger brush. And then I'm just going to make strokes around the areas that I want to remove. So like I said, these spots over here and this one here. And then let's get rid of this little sticker here. And everything else looks good. So let's go ahead and click on remove. And voila. I mean, that alone, in terms of what I used to have to do, which I'm sure many of you can remember, trying to remove these complex areas from complex backgrounds, it never ended up looking good. Even with the content aware healing brush, which is what predates gen remove, having gen remove is magical. It's one of those things that it's a generative AI tool, no way around it, but for the purposes that it serves in my editing workflow, there is nothing that comes close to it. So I'm totally okay with it, and I'm okay with using it in my photos. Of course, if I was going to share this photo with a medium or a place where using AI is not allowed, I wouldn't use it. But this is for my own enjoyment and to show you how I edit my photos. So that's why it's in there. And actually, now that I look at it, there are a few more distractions that I want to get rid of. These kind of little specular highlights that are, I don't know, it's drawing my eye. This is something I always do, is I'll look at the photo and I'll pay attention to where my eye goes. So like that spot right there, I want to get rid of. That right there. Pretty much everything else. Actually, this specular highlight right there. All right, that's good. Let's click on remove again. And perfect. Just fantastic. Now, as part of this, because I applied gen remove after applying the adaptive profile, both of which are AI tools, you can see that I kicked off the AI edit order of operations warning. So all I need to do here is click here and click on update all to bring all of the pixels into a valid state. Now, don't worry if you don't know what that is. You should know what it is. It's very important. And so at the end of this video, I'm going to link to another video where I deep dive into this. Please don't skip it. Please put in the time to watch that one because it's very important. All right, so we're done with our distractions. Now we can start having fun editing. Now, for the most part, we're really good. I mean, again, we're working on a single raw image. We didn't do any tone mapping, and you can see just how much information there is in the photo. Like, yes, if you want, you can kind of pull back on the highlights a bit. If you're, kind of like OCD, like I am, and you don't want to see any warnings, but it's okay to have highlights that are blown out. These are very bright lights. It's okay. Same thing with shadows. Like you could open it up a bit. You can push the blacks over. And now we are at kind of a really good, just kind of like evenly exposed place. Next, of course, is adding some contrast. I don't use the contrast slider as a matter of principle. I prefer building contrast myself. Currently, I'm in the blue channel here, but I want to get into the luminance channel for point curves. And I'm going to apply a very traditional S-curve. So I'm going to drop a point here and I'm going to drop down, and you can see how as I do, we get those beautiful rich shadows. So right there, they're just becoming more accentuated. I'll drop a point here for highlights. And so right around here, and it's okay. Like I'm looking at these highlights here and I'm looking for them to start blooming a bit, which is totally okay. Not too much. Like I don't want to go like here. This is kind of like, now we're getting into the territory of how I edited my photo in 2010. So I'm going to back off right around here. Let's drop a dot here and adjust the midtones. So right around there, pretty much in the center. Then let's go ahead and I'm going to introduce a little gray into the black point. So somewhere around here. And then I'm also going to introduce gray into the white point. And this is going to create a very soft, contrasty look. So if we toggle this, you can see this is without any point curve adjustment. This is with the point curve. Now, you can see how it is getting a bit too crunchy for me in terms of tone. So I'm going to open up the shadows a bit. I'm also going to take my refine saturation slider here and move it down about halfway. And you can see, like, if I go back and forth, like if you look at the yellow of the payphone receiver, like it just has this color boost. So I always find about halfway is a nice compromise. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do is go to the blue channel, which is where I started, And I'm going to take a point here in the shadows and I'm going to drag it down just a tiny bit. And I'm talking about the tiniest bit. And what that does is it's introducing a bit of orange into the shadows of the image. And I feel like it does a really nice job of further balancing the overall kind of white balance, the temperature and tint of the photo. I'm also going to go ahead here and open up shadows a bit more. So right here looks good. Maybe also open up exposure. Yeah, okay, good. That's looking good. Then let's go to the calibration section, which if you are using Lightroom desktop is hidden by default. So as always, if you want to enable this, which I highly recommend you do, you'll click on this try dot over here and you will select show color calibration. I'm going to increase the blue primary saturation slider and the red primary saturation slider. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's, again, it's one of those things that probably with the YouTube compression, you won't see it, but on my display, this is fantastic. All right, we're done with our global edits for the most part. Now let's go ahead and move on to masking. So we'll apply local edits. Let's start with increasing detail in the area that's pretty much in focus. Remember, the tilt shift lens created this kind of vertical plane of focus as opposed to a horizontal plane of focus, which can be disconcerting. And again, that's why I really over abused it. But I'll go ahead, take this linear gradient, and I'm just going to click and drag out this way. So right around there looks good. So basically everything that is in the overlay will have whatever I apply here in the edit stack. That's where it will be applied, and then it'll fall off as we go to the right. So I'm going to go ahead under effects. I'm going to add a little bit of texture, not too much. A little bit of clarity. Yeah, that's looking good. Just a tiny bit. Yeah, that's looking good. All right, let's go up here and let's rename this mask. I'll call this texture enhancer. Of course, I want to type it correctly. Now, let's go ahead and bring out some of the elements of this payphone. Remember I said how this yellow handle here, the receiver, is kind of like the focal point. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new mask. I'm going to select objects, and I'm just going to drag a rectangular marquee around the receiver. And you can see that Lightroom does a fantastic job of making that selection. And because I made that selection, anything I do now will only apply to this selection. So why did I do that? Well, if I went ahead to point color over here and I selected the yellow of this payphone, well, if I made any edits without making the mask, then these edits would apply to this color range within the entire image. And I don't want that. I only want point color to apply to this handle, which is why I first made my mask selection. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my luminance shift, I'm going to increase it, and you can see how it brightens the handle. I'm going to increase saturation. I'm going to also push the hue towards the right here to this really, really kind of canary yellow. I'm going to drop the luminance down a bit though, because that's a bit bright. So right around there. And so let's see what that, yeah, look at that. It's perfect. I love it. It just brings it out. The other thing that I want to do is I want to kind of darken the blue here of the phone icon and the word phone, just these two elements here. So let's go ahead. We'll go back to the top, and it's kind of the same principle. Let's go ahead and rename this first. We'll call this yellow phone receiver. And then we'll create a new mask. Same as before, we'll use objects using the rectangular marquee tool. And I'm just going to make this selection here. And you can see that Lightroom just does a fantastic job of that. So just like before, I'm going to go to point color. I'm going to click on color here. And this time I'm going to go kind of the opposite route. I'm going to take the luminance shift. I'm going to drop it down, and you can see how it's getting darker. I'll increase the saturation, and I'm going to move the hue shift this way. But that's only affecting this phone icon. I need to also apply the same effect here. Let's go to the top. We're going to select add. We'll use objects again. And then I'm just going to make the same rectangular marquee over here. And now you can see that it's applied to both. Now, if you want to get rid of that little area there to the left of the word phone, not a problem. All you need to do is click on subtract. We'll go to brush. Let's turn on the overlay so we can see what we're doing. And then with a really small brush, I'm just going to paint out that strip. Again, you don't have to do that. No one, I doubt anyone would notice it. But again, little things like that, I'm a bit OCD over. And so you've got the tools, and it just, the more you do these things, the more kind of you practice and you really learn to master the tools. And if there's anything that you're going to master, it should be the masking panel. All right, let's go ahead and turn off that overlay. Let's rename this to blue phone. It doesn't have to be overly creative, but you can see here, if we look over there, let's turn off those overlay pins. And you can see if we look at the phone, it just pops a bit more. And don't forget, there's also this amount slider here. So if I want to really accentuate that, I can push this to the right. See? Actually, I'm going to push this up. Pretty much, let's do it to 200. Make it really pop. All right, now I want to kind of draw your eye to this left kind of third of the frame. As you'll agree, I think, the image is well exposed, right? Like, it's obviously brighter here, but overall, you're looking at the histogram here, we're looking pretty good, despite this being a very challenging tonal scene. So I'm going to create a custom vignette. And to do that, I'm going to click on Create New Mask. I'm going to use Radial Gradient, and I'm going to make a tall kind of oval. So something like this. And I'll put it right here. Now, of course, if I drop exposure, well, it's darkening the selection, which you can see with the overlay. So what I need to do first is flip it. So I'm going to click on Invert, and now you can see, okay, now we're kind of getting that really nice kind of custom vignette here. If I over accentuate it, you can see what it's doing. That's way too strong. Like just something like this. I'm going to widen this a bit more. And I'm also going to increase highlights because I don't want to darken the highlights. I mean, they're bright lights. So let's go ahead and increase those highlights, get a bit of that halation going. So like that, that looks good. Now let's see what that effect has. Yeah, exactly. That's basically what I'm going for. Let's go ahead and rename this. So this is a custom vignette. And then let's wrap things up. Now I would have applied lens blur. I totally would have applied lens blur if I didn't use the tilt function of this lens and apply this funky vertical kind of plane of focus, which rendered this area out of focus. I probably would have used lens blur, but that would be way overkill. So we do need to apply sharpening. As always, I apply sharpening pretty much the same way, where I take radius, I bring it to 0.5, take detail, I bring it to 100. Let's go ahead and zoom in here to 100% and press and hold on the Option key or Alt key while dragging on the amount slider. And so I'm looking at kind of like the keypad there. Make sure I don't over sharpen. Then let's zoom out. Same thing, press and hold the Option or Alt key while dragging on the masking slider. Let's remove sharpening from these kind of like low frequency areas, these flat areas. So we only want the high contrast edges to have sharpening applied. So this looks good. And if we hit the backslash key, this is what we started with, which is kind of crazy. And this is what we ended with. Now let's go ahead and select these two images here, our original from 2010 and re-edit today in 2026. And let's compare them. Let's close out the film strip here. And so, yeah, I mean, huge differences, right? Like this is, again, I've said this before. In pretty much every one of these episodes, there's at least one person in the comments who's like, I actually like the original. And so again, I don't want to make it seem like this is bad per se. I think it's bad, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you think it's bad. And I totally acknowledge that. But, you know, if we kind of zoom in here, I think you'll agree, like this is overly degraded. I mean, look at this, the handle, first of all, it lost most of its color. And two, this is over sharpened to the nth degree. Like this is really, really bad. It's much better here. And I could probably do even more to restore some of the sharpening, but it's totally fine. Like all of this, like push for coin, this looks more legible. You can see how everything just looks more even. The textures look more even than this over here. So yeah, just, I don't know. I'm glad that this is something I could turn back to see. But I much rather prefer this one over here. It just, I don't know, to me, it looks like more representative of how I would edit a photo today, which makes total sense. And so like I just said, and I usually say at the end of these videos, what's bad for me doesn't necessarily mean that it should be bad for you. There are some things that are objectively bad about that edit. But if you're the kind of person who's really into that super, super contrasty look, then, you do you keep doing that. But just be aware that as you get kind of progressed as a photographer, those senses might change. And that's why it's really, really important, if you can, shoot RAW or DNG, but keep those raw so that you can always come back and have the actual sensor data information to re-edit as things like, again, like gen remove. That was not even a concept in 2010. Having it now is fantastic. Also, just the process versions of Lightroom have improved over time. We didn't have point color back then. And so all these things that I could use today on a photo that I took over 16 years ago is really fantastic, which is why I love this series. I'm going to continue doing it, and why I want to reinforce that. Don't worry, like it's okay to go back. It's okay to look at those photos that were like, you're like, whoa, like this one, just like, what was I thinking? That's okay, as long as you kind of can be aware of that and then realize what has changed from then until now. So with that, I showed you some things that are in Lightroom Desktop, but there is plenty more, including Lightroom Mobile and Web. So if you want to learn everything there is to know about those surfaces, please check out my course called Lightroom Everywhere. Links in the description below. I mentioned how I have this video about the AI edit order of operations. Check that out, or you can see what YouTube thinks you might like. As always, a thumbs up is greatly appreciated, as is clicking on the subscribe button and bell icon to get notified of all future videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.